Have you ever looked at your relationships and realized a disturbing pattern? You're always the one giving more, compromising more, and somehow ending up with less of yourself at the end. You sacrifice your needs, your boundaries, even your identity, all in the desperate hope that if you just give enough, you'll finally be worthy of love. What if I told you this isn't random bad luck in relationships, but a psychological wound so deep that it's become invisible to you? A wound that whispers, your real self isn't enough. Your only value is what you can give to others. Today we're going to uncover why you keep sacrificing yourself to be loved, and more importantly, how to break free from this pattern that's been draining your soul for far too long. If this uncomfortable truth is already resonating somewhere deep inside you, hit subscribe now. This channel explores the psychological shadows and spiritual transformations others are afraid to name. Between the masks we wear for others and the person we truly are lies a painful contradiction that Carl Jung called the divided self. When we consistently abandon who we are to secure the love of others, we're not just making occasional compromises, we're living out a profound psychological wound. This pattern of self-sacrifice doesn't happen by accident. It's a complex adaptation that begins in childhood and crystallizes into what therapists now call codependency, or what Jung might have recognized as the suppression of the authentic self in service to a false persona. Today, we'll explore 6 manifestations of this self-abandonment pattern through the lens of both Jungian psychology and modern relational frameworks. We'll uncover how the child who learned that conditional love was the only love available grows into an adult who continues to offer themselves as a sacrifice on the altar of external validation. More importantly, we'll chart a path towards psychological wholeness, where you can both give and receive love without losing yourself in the process. This journey isn't just about fixing relationships. It's about the fundamental psychological transformation that Jung called individuation, becoming who you truly are, not who you think others need you to be. Chapter 1. The childhood wound of conditional love. The path to self-sacrifice begins long before our adult relationships. It starts in the sacred, vulnerable space of childhood, where we first learn what love is and what it costs. When a child receives the implicit or explicit message that love is conditional, that it depends on their performance, compliance, or role in maintaining family harmony, they develop what Jung called a complex. This emotional complex functions like an internal program that equates love with utility. The child learns that they are loved not for their inherent worth, but for what they can provide. Their achievements, their emotional labor, their ability to anticipate and meet others' needs. This conditional framework creates what psychologists now call an insecure attachment style. The developing child internalizes a profound anxiety. If I'm not useful, I will be abandoned. They learn to suppress their own needs in favor of attunement to others. Their authentic emotions become dangerous liabilities that might disrupt the fragile connection to caregivers. Consider the child of a parent with narcissistic traits or addiction issues. This child quickly learns to become the emotional caretaker, the perfect achiever, or the family peacemaker. They become exquisitely sensitive to shifts in their parents' moods, learning to regulate others' emotions at the expense of their own. The message is clear. Your value lies in what you can do for others, not in who you are. Similarly, children raised in environments of emotional neglect learn that their needs and feelings are inconvenient or irrelevant. They adapt by becoming self-sufficient on the surface while harboring a deep, unnamed hunger for recognition and care. This creates what Jung called a hungry shadow, disowned needs that are pushed into the unconscious but continue to drive behavior from the dark. The tragedy is that this adaptation is initially brilliant. It helps the child secure whatever connection is available. But as we mature, this same adaptation becomes the very thing that prevents authentic intimacy. We carry this wounded inner child into adulthood, still desperately trying to earn love through self-erasure and perpetual giving. Modern attachment theory confirms what Jung intuited decades ago. These early patterns create internal working models that act as templates for all future relationships. The child who learned, "I am only worthy of love when I'm useful," becomes the adult partner who can't say no, who anticipates needs before they're expressed, who feels guilty for having needs of their own. This isn't just psychological theory. Neuroscience now shows us how these early relational patterns become encoded in our nervous system, creating unconscious reactions that bypass our rational thinking. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Chapter 2. The persona of the eternal caretaker. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we wear to meet social expectations. For those caught in patterns of self-sacrifice, this mask often takes the form of what we might call the eternal caretaker, a role that seems noble on the surface, but silently devours the authentic self beneath. This persona manifests in relationships as a hyper-vigilant attunement to others' needs, coupled with a studied ignorance of one's own. You become a master at reading micro-expressions, anticipating unspoken desires, and shape-shifting to become whatever the other person needs in any given moment. You pride yourself on being described as supportive, selfless, and always there for others. These traits become your identity, your source of worth, and paradoxically, your prison. The eternal caretaker finds validation through utility. You're the friend who drops everything when someone calls in crisis, the partner who remembers every anniversary and preference, the family member who mediates conflicts and ensures everyone else's comfort. You've become so skilled at meeting others' needs that you've forgotten how to recognize your own, much less express them. Modern psychologists call this compulsive caregiving, a defense mechanism that protects you from the vulnerability of having needs. By always being the giver, you avoid the terror of potential rejection that comes with asking for something yourself. There's a hidden power in this position too. As the one who gives, you never have to experience the helplessness of receiving. This pattern creates relationships built on an imbalanced exchange. You give to receive love, but the exchange is never equivalent. You offer practical support, emotional labor, constant accommodation, and unwavering loyalty. In return, you accept crumbs of appreciation, intermittent attention, and the temporary relief of not being abandoned. The eternal caretaker's mantra becomes, "If I can just give enough, be enough, do enough, then I'll finally be worthy of love." But this premise contains its own tragedy. It creates a moving target that can never be reached. Because the core wound isn't about what you do, it's about the mistaken belief that your inherent worth is insufficient. Jung would recognize this as a fundamental confusion between the personal self and what he called the self with a capital S, the authentic, whole person beneath social adaptations. When we live as the eternal caretaker, we confuse our functionality for our essence. We believe we are loved for what we provide rather than who we are. This persona initially feels safe because it creates the illusion of control. If love depends on what you give, then surely you can secure it through perpetual giving. But this strategy eventually collapses under its own weight. The body keeps score, manifesting exhaustion, resentment, and a deep sense of emptiness that no amount of external validation can fill. Chapter 3. The shadow cost of self-abandonment. Beneath the socially rewarded persona of the selfless giver lies a shadow reality that few are willing to acknowledge. This is the hidden cost of chronic self-abandonment, a price paid not just in relationships, but in your relationship with yourself. Jung defined the shadow as the aspects of ourselves that we reject and relegate to the unconscious. When we consistently prioritize others' needs over our own, we don't just ignore our needs. We actively push them into the shadow, where they don't disappear, but instead grow more powerful and distorted. The first shadow cost is what therapists call emotional bankruptcy. Just as a financial account cannot indefinitely sustain withdrawals without deposits, your emotional reserves become depleted when you give without replenishment. This isn't just metaphorical. Research in psychoneuroimmunology shows that chronic self-neglect impacts the body's stress response system, immune function, and even cellular aging. The second shadow cost is a growing unconscious resentment. On the surface, you maintain the identity of the willing giver, but beneath this mask, a ledger is being kept. Every unacknowledged need, every swallowed no, every compromise that cuts against your core values, all of these accumulate in what Jung would call the shadow ledger. Eventually, this resentment leaks out in passive-aggressive behavior, mysterious illnesses, emotional withdrawal, or sudden relationship ruptures that seem to come out of nowhere. The third cost is a profound disconnection from your own truth. When you habitually override your inner signals to accommodate others, you lose touch with your intuition, your authentic preferences, even your sense of purpose. Modern neuroscience confirms that this constant self-overriding actually weakens the neural pathways responsible for interoception, the ability to sense and interpret your body's internal signals. You become, in essence, a stranger to yourself. Perhaps most insidious is the shadow bargain at work. If I completely accommodate you, you must love me in return. This unconscious contract creates not just resentment when it inevitably fails, but a deep disillusionment with love itself. When the bargain doesn't produce the unconditional love you secretly crave, the wound deepens rather than heals. This pattern also creates what Jung called the inflation of the shadow. When denied conscious expression, your legitimate needs for reciprocity, boundaries, and authentic self-expression don't disappear. They go underground, gathering power in the unconscious. This explains why those who sacrifice themselves for decades sometimes snap in what appears to be a personality reversal, suddenly becoming uncharacteristically selfish, rageful, or demanding. Modern relational psychology adds another dimension to understanding this shadow cost. The paradox that chronic self-abandonment actually prevents the very intimacy it attempts to secure. True intimacy requires two whole people bringing their authentic selves to the relationship. When you hide your true needs and feelings, you create the illusion of closeness, while guaranteeing that the other person can never truly know you. You become loved for your persona rather than your essence. The ultimate shadow cost is spiritual, the loss of connection to what Jung called the self with a capital S. Your authentic, whole being that exists beneath adaptations and personas. This disconnection manifests as a pervasive sense of emptiness that no external validation can fill. Chapter 4. The archetypal patterns of self-sacrifice. Our tendency towards self-sacrifice doesn't exist in isolation. It connects to powerful archetypal patterns that have shaped human experience across cultures and throughout history. Understanding these archetypes gives us deeper insight into how our personal wounds connect to collective human themes. Jung identified several archetypal patterns that particularly resonate with those caught in self-sacrificial relationships. The first is the martyr archetype, the one who suffers for others and finds meaning in that suffering. The martyr archetype carries a noble energy, but becomes destructive when it operates unconsciously, leading us to believe that our worth is measured by how much pain we're willing to endure for love. The second archetypal pattern is the rescuer, part of what psychologists now call the drama triangle. The rescuer derives identity and purpose from saving others, often at their own expense. This archetype feels righteous and necessary, making it particularly resistant to change. After all, who would question the value of helping others? Yet, when this pattern operates compulsively, it creates dependencies rather than true empowerment. A third archetypal pattern Jung might recognize in self-sacrificial relationships is the puella puer aeternus, the eternal child who remains in a position of dependency and incomplete development. By never fully claiming your adult authority and autonomy, you remain in a childlike state, seeking parental figures who will finally provide the unconditional love you missed. This creates relationships with power imbalances where you trade authenticity for care. Modern relational psychology adds the concept of trauma bonding to this archetypal understanding. When we've been conditioned to associate love with self-abandonment, we form powerful neurochemical attachments to relationships that recreate this familiar pattern. The intermittent reinforcement of occasional validation creates stronger bonds than consistent positive treatment, explaining why those caught in self-sacrificial patterns often find stable, respectful relationships somehow less compelling than chaotic ones that recreate their original wound. These archetypal patterns become embedded in what Jung called complexes, clusters of emotionally charged associations that act as autonomous sub-personalities within our psyche. When triggered, these complexes temporarily take over, causing us to react from old wounds rather than present reality. This explains why, even when we intellectually understand our patterns, we find ourselves repeating them in moments of emotional activation. The pull of these archetypal patterns is powerful precisely because they connect to universal human themes of sacrifice, love, and belonging. They feel larger than our individual experience because they represent collective human patterns that have been enacted throughout history. This doesn't mean we're doomed to repeat them, but it does explain why breaking free requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires conscious engagement with these powerful archetypal energies. Chapter 5: The False Self and the True Self. At the heart of self-sacrificial patterns lies a fundamental confusion between what psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott called the false self and the true self, a concept that parallels Jung's distinction between the persona and the authentic self. The false self develops as a protective adaptation to conditional love. It's the self that's acceptable to others, the self that knows how to perform and please. It's constructed around the question, what must I be to secure love and belonging? This false self becomes so habitual that we mistake it for our true identity. We believe we are naturally self-sacrificing, naturally accommodating, naturally attuned to others at our own expense. In contrast, the true self is what Jung would call the authentic expression of your whole being, including your needs, desires, boundaries, and unique perspective. The true self doesn't calculate what behavior will secure love. It simply expresses what is authentic in each moment. This doesn't mean selfishness. The true self is capable of genuine generosity, but it's generosity that flows from fullness rather than fear. Modern neuroscience offers fascinating insights into this split. Research shows that chronic self-abandonment creates a disconnection between the prefrontal cortex, responsible for social adaptation, and the limbic system, where authentic emotions are processed. This neurological split manifests as the common experience of knowing you should have boundaries while feeling emotionally incapable of enforcing them. The healing journey involves what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating disowned aspects of the self to become psychologically whole. This requires a radical honesty about the ways you've abandoned yourself to secure external validation. It means questioning core beliefs like "my needs are less important" or "putting myself first is selfish." Beliefs that may have been reinforced by family systems, cultural messages, or even religious teachings that glorify self-sacrifice. For many, there's a terrifying void on the other side of these beliefs. If you're not the perpetual giver, who are you? This existential question marks the threshold of true transformation. Discovering your authentic self requires a willingness to sit in the discomfort of not knowing who you are beyond your adaptations. This journey also involves grief, mourning the conditional nature of the love you received, mourning the parts of yourself you abandoned, mourning the recognition that no amount of self-sacrifice could heal your original wound. This grief isn't optional. It's the necessary gateway to authenticity. The process of reclaiming the true self isn't about swinging to selfishness or abandoning relationships. It's about establishing what Jung might call a conscious relationship between your authentic needs and your connection to others. It's about recognizing that true love doesn't require self-erasure. In fact, it's only possible between people who bring their whole selves to the relationship. Chapter 6. The Path to Wholeness. Loving without losing yourself. The journey from self-abandonment to wholeness isn't about rejecting relationships or becoming selfish. It's about transforming how you show up in connection with others, moving from love based on fear to love based on authenticity. This transformation follows what Jung would recognize as the individuation process, the psychological journey toward becoming your whole, authentic self. This path isn't linear, but spiral, involving several key phases that often overlap and repeat at deeper levels. The first phase is awareness, recognizing the patterns of self-sacrifice not just intellectually, but emotionally. This means watching yourself in relationships with compassionate curiosity rather than judgment. Notice when you automatically defer, when you silence your truth, when you override your boundaries. Each moment of awareness creates a small gap between stimulus and response, a gap that holds the possibility of new choices. The second phase involves reclaiming your relationship with your own needs. This begins with the radical act of asking yourself throughout the day, what do I need right now? What do I want? What feels true for me? These questions may initially be met with silence or confusion after years of focusing exclusively on others' needs. This is normal. The capacity to hear your own inner voice strengthens with practice. The third phase involves what modern psychologists call reparenting, giving yourself the unconditional presence, validation, and care that may have been missing in your original attachments. This internal work changes the fundamental equation. Rather than seeking external sources to fill your emptiness, you learn to fill yourself first, creating relationships from fullness rather than lack. The fourth phase is perhaps the most challenging, setting boundaries in existing relationships. This inevitably creates resistance in systems that have benefited from your self-abandonment. People who have grown accustomed to your endless accommodation may react with confusion, guilt-inducing tactics, or even abandonment when you begin to honor your needs. This resistance tests your commitment to your authentic self and reveals which relationships can evolve with you and which cannot. The fifth phase involves developing what Jung called the conscious relationship to the shadow, acknowledging the parts of yourself that you've denied, including healthy aggression, self-protection, and the capacity to prioritize yourself. This doesn't mean becoming selfish, but developing a balance where self-care and care for others exist in dynamic equilibrium. Throughout this journey, you'll face what Jung called the tension of opposites, the seemingly contradictory needs for both autonomy and connection. The immature psyche tries to resolve this tension by choosing one and rejecting the other, either complete self-sacrifice or defensive isolation. The mature psyche learns to hold both, creating what modern relational psychologists call differentiated connection, the capacity to stay connected to others while remaining true to yourself. This transformation isn't just psychological, but spiritual. Jung recognized that the individuation process ultimately leads to a connection with something larger than the personal self, what he called the self with a capital S, the organizing center of the entire personality that transcends the ego. From this perspective, reclaiming your authentic being isn't selfish but sacred. It's the fulfillment of your unique potential and purpose. The irony is that only by stopping the desperate attempt to secure love through self-erasure can you experience the love you've always sought. When you show up as your authentic self, with your needs, boundaries, and truth intact, you create the possibility of being truly seen and loved for who you are, not just for what you can give. We began this journey by examining a painful pattern, the tendency to sacrifice yourself to secure love. We've seen how this pattern originates in childhood adaptations to conditional love, becomes reinforced through archetypal energies and neurobiological pathways, and ultimately prevents the very intimacy it attempts to create. The path forward isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you've always been, beneath the adaptations and personas. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't earned through perpetual giving, but is inherent in your very existence. This journey isn't completed in a day or even a year. It's a continuous spiral of growth, with each turn bringing deeper integration and authenticity. There will be setbacks, moments when old patterns resurface, particularly under stress. But with each conscious choice to honor your truth, the new neural pathways of self-respect strengthen, making authentic living increasingly natural. Remember that the goal isn't perfect self-actualization, but conscious relationship with all parts of yourself, including the wounded child who learned to earn love through self-abandonment. This child deserves your compassion, not your criticism. Their adaptation was an act of profound intelligence and survival in environments where authentic expression wasn't safe. As Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is not selfishness, but sacred work. By reclaiming your wholeness, you don't just transform your own life, you create the possibility of genuine connection with others based on authenticity rather than performance. If this exploration has resonated with something deep inside you, subscribe to continue this journey together. Leave a comment sharing your experience with self-sacrifice in relationships. And remember, the path to being loved for who you truly are begins with the courageous act of loving yourself first. Your authentic self is waiting beneath the adaptations. It's never too late to come home to who you've always been.